He never spoke a single word since he was rescued from the streets, until a stranger walked through that door and everything began to change. Monday morning arrived punctually like all others in Michael Sullivan's life. The alarm sounded at 6 o'clock sharp, and his eyes opened to face the immaculate ceiling of his master suite. 37 years old, owner of Sullivan Developments, one of the most respected construction companies in Denver, Michael had transformed discipline into his most faithful companion. He got up, opened the automated curtains with a voice command, and contemplated the privileged view of Highlands Ranch. His mansion, strategically positioned in the highest part of the upscale neighborhood, offered a panoramic view of the Colorado capital, a city he had helped reshape, building by building, contract by contract. The shower lasted exactly 8 minutes. Breakfast, prepared by Mrs. Wilson, his trusted housekeeper, was meticulously arranged on the marble kitchen table. Whole grain bread, white cheese, fresh fruit, and freshly brewed coffee. He ate in silence, leafing through reports on his tablet, while in the background he listened to local news on Mrs. Wilson's small radio, the only concession he made to the housekeeper's taste. "You look tired today, Mr. Michael," commented Mrs. Wilson, as she collected the coffee cup. "It's normal, Mrs. Wilson. Productive night. Reviewing contracts," he replied without taking his eyes off the tablet. The truth was that he had spent another sleepless night, wandering through the empty rooms of the mansion, questioning decisions that even he no longer understood. At 7:30, the driver was already waiting at the door. The black Audi, impeccable like everything in his life, glided smoothly through the streets of Denver. During the journey to the office downtown, Michael checked messages, answered emails, scheduled meetings, the perfect routine of a man who had converted predictability into success. On the 20th floor of the corporate building that bore his surname, his secretary, Melissa, was already waiting with the day's schedule organized. "Good morning, Mr. Sullivan. The people from the Vertical Gardens project are already in the meeting room. The municipal secretary called confirming your participation in tomorrow's charity event. And Mr. Henry from New Horizons Development asked to reschedule lunch for Thursday." Michael nodded mechanically. Charity events were not part of his usual routine, but his PR team had insisted on the importance of associating Sullivan Developments with social causes. Social marketing, as they called it. Just another item on his agenda. The meeting with the architects went as expected. Presentation of floor plans, discussion of sustainable materials, cost projections, profitability forecasts. Michael conducted everything with the precision of a maestro, asking targeted questions, suggesting calculated adjustments, approving or vetoing ideas with the authority of someone who knew every inch of the Denver real estate market. "What did you think of the shared gourmet space proposal, Michael?" asked Tanya Matthews, the project's chief architect. "Passing trend. In 2 years, we'll be renovating for something more individualized. Coloradans like privacy, Tanya. We learned that at the Rocky Mountain Estates, remember?" The architect agreed, taking notes. Nobody questioned Michael Sullivan's intuition for real estate trends. He had built an empire based on this almost supernatural ability to predict what people would desire even before they knew it themselves. Lunch was in the office while reviewing contracts. A mushroom risotto ordered from the restaurant on the ground floor, accompanied by sparkling water. No alcohol on weekdays, an inviolable rule. Sometimes Michael wondered who he created so many rules for, since he had no one to share his achievements or failures with. His parents had passed away in a car accident when he was only 22, leaving him a medium-sized construction company that he had transformed into an empire. There were no siblings. Serious relationships? They never lasted more than a few months. Women either too ambitious or too sentimental, never at the right point of balance that his ordered world required. The afternoon continued, with visits to 2 construction sites in the Cherry Creek area. Michael liked to personally see the progress, talk to construction foremen, hear the difficulties of the workers. He was respected for this, the businessman who didn't hide in air-conditioned rooms. He walked the scaffolding, checked finishes, suggested practical solutions based on years of experience. "Mr. Sullivan, could you take a picture with the team?" "We've completed 50 days without accidents," asked Anthony, the construction company's oldest foreman. "Of course, Anthony. But just call me Michael, we've talked about this." The photo was taken, forced smiles from all sides, including his own. Michael knew how to smile when necessary, another business skill acquired over the years. He returned home at 7 o'clock as usual. Solitary dinner prepared by Mrs. Wilson, who had already gone home, leaving everything organized. A glass of red wine, Friday's concession, accompanying the filet with grilled vegetables. Television tuned to the news channel, more for noise than for real interest. That night, however, something different happened. While mindlessly flipping through channels, a report caught his attention. Small Steps Foundation hosts charity event for children in socially vulnerable situations. Michael turned up the volume. The reporter was interviewing a grey-haired lady with a welcoming smile. "Mrs. Cooper, how did the Small Steps Foundation come about? After 30 years as a public school teacher, I couldn't accept that so many children were left without support. We started helping 10 boys and girls in a borrowed room. Today there are more than 100 children, many with special needs. But we need help to continue." The camera showed children playing in a simple space, but one organized with care. One in particular caught Michael's attention, a small boy, sitting alone in a corner, oblivious to everything, twirling something between his fingers with absolute concentration. Some of these children were abandoned, others live in situations of extreme risk. A little Johnny, for example, the camera focused on the solitary boy, was found sleeping behind a market. He doesn't speak, doesn't interact. Doctors suspect severe autism, but without family, without documents, it's difficult to even get proper treatment. Michael felt something strange, a tightness in his chest that he couldn't explain. He finished the wine in one gulp and abruptly turned off the television. He tried to resume reading a report on new land in the Belvedere region, but the words jumbled before his eyes. The image of the solitary boy with an empty gaze persisted like a watermark in his mind. "Ridiculous," he muttered to himself. "Tomorrow you won't even remember this." But he did remember. The next morning, while Melissa recited the day's schedule, Michael interrupted her. "The charity event. It's today at 7 p.m., correct?" "Yes, sir. At the Denver Athletic Club Convention Center. You're just going for the symbolic check presentation and some photos as we agreed." "Change of plans. I want to visit the foundation first. Cancel my afternoon appointments." Melissa looked confused but didn't question. It wasn't like Michael to alter his schedule so abruptly, much less for visits to foundations. At 4 in the afternoon, the Audi parked in front of an old 2-story house in the Baker district. The discreet sign announced, "Small Steps, Childcare and Development." Michael remained in the car for a few minutes, observing children playing in the small front yard under the supervision of young volunteers. He took a deep breath and got out, adjusting his impeccable suit, armor he used against the world and its unpredictabilities. "Can I help you?" A young woman with a volunteer badge approached, smiling. "I'm Michael Sullivan. I came to learn about your work before tonight's event." The young woman's eyes widened in recognition. In minutes, Mrs. Cooper came hurrying down the corridor, extending hands calloused by decades of dedicated work. "Mr. Sullivan, what an honor to have you here. We weren't expecting... normally donors just... I'd like to see the facilities, if possible," Michael politely interrupted. "And," he hesitated briefly, "I'd like to meet Johnny. I saw the report yesterday." Mrs. Cooper's smile trembled slightly. Of course. Johnny, he's in the sensory room. That's where he spends most of his time. But I should warn you that he doesn't interact much." Michael followed the lady through colorful corridors, decorated with children's drawings and motivational phrases. Children ran, laughed. Some waved curiously at the man in a suit who seemed out of place in that environment of spontaneity. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give it a like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We continue. The sensory room was a small universe apart within the foundation. Soft lights and shades of blue and green danced on the walls. A cozy corner with colorful cushions housed some children playing under the supervision of a volunteer. Instrumental music played at a low volume, creating an atmosphere of tranquility. And there he was, exactly as in the report. Johnny didn't seem to be more than 6 years old. Sitting in a corner, his back against the wall, he had disheveled brown hair and large eyes that fixed on an invisible point in space. Between his small fingers, he incessantly twirled a crumpled piece of paper. "He's always with that paper," explained Mrs. Cooper in a low voice. It was the only thing he brought with him when we found him. We tried to take it away once to give him a bath, and the crisis was so intense that we never tried again. Michael observed the boy with a curiosity that even he couldn't understand. There was something in that solitude, in that self-imposed isolation that seemed strangely familiar to him. "May I approach him?" he asked, surprising himself with his own question. "You can try, but don't expect a reaction. And please, slow movements, no noise." Michael loosened his tie, unbuttoned the first button of his dress shirt, and walked slowly until he knelt a few meters from the boy. He sat on the floor, something he hadn't done in decades since childhood. The expensive fabric of his suit rubbed against the colorful carpet in the room. "Hi, Johnny," he said in a low voice. "My name is Michael." No response, as expected. The boy continued in his private world, twirling the paper between his fingers with mechanical precision. Michael remained there in silence for minutes that seemed to stretch indefinitely. He didn't try to establish verbal contact again. He just observed, like someone contemplating a complex puzzle. That's when he noticed something curious. The movement of Johnny's fingers wasn't random. There was a pattern. 3 turns to the right, pause, 2 to the left, pause, and start again. Michael, a man of patterns and predictability, recognized an internal order there that only made sense to the boy. When he finally stood up, he felt slightly dizzy. Not from the physical effort, but from the intensity of the experience. He said goodbye to Mrs. Cooper, with vague promises of continued support for the foundation, and headed to the charity event at the Denver Athletic Club, where he would present a generous check and pose for photos that would certainly appear in the social pages of newspapers the next day. Throughout the ceremony, however, his thoughts wandered to the sensory room and to the boy with the crumpled paper. Later, upon arriving home, instead of serving himself the usual Friday wine, Michael remained on the veranda, looking at the city lights without really seeing them. Something had broken inside him, or perhaps begun to rebuild itself in a different way. The following Monday, to Melissa's astonishment, Michael asked her to cancel all his meetings. "Is there a problem, Mr. Sullivan?" "None, just urgent personal matters." Melissa frowned, concerned. In 15 years as his secretary, she had never seen him cancel an entire day of work for personal matters. Michael Sullivan didn't have personal matters. He only had work. That morning, Michael visited 3 specialists in child development, a lawyer specializing in adoption, and finally returned to the Small Steps Foundation. The decision he had made during the sleepless weekend was so irrational and impulsive that even he couldn't explain it satisfactorily. But for the first time in years, he felt absolutely certain about something that had nothing to do with real estate business. "You want to adopt Johnny?" Mrs. Cooper repeated, incredulous, when Michael explained his intentions. "Yes, I've already spoken with my lawyer about the legal procedures. I know it won't be easy or quick, but I'm willing to go through the entire process. Mr. Sullivan, Johnny, he has very specific needs. He's not like other children. The preliminary diagnosis indicates severe autism, possibly traumas that we don't know about. I'm aware of that. I've already consulted specialists and I'm prepared to offer all the necessary support." Mrs. Cooper studied Michael's face for long moments. There was no denying that he had the financial resources to give Johnny what the foundation, with all its limitations, could never offer. But there was something else at stake, something that no money could buy. "Why, Mr. Sullivan? Forgive my frankness, but I need to understand. You're a man alone with an extremely busy routine. Why choose precisely a child who will require so much dedication, so much time, so much patience?" Michael didn't have a ready answer. For the first time in years, someone had disarmed him with a simple question. He looked out the window of Mrs. Cooper's office, watching the children playing in the yard. "I can't explain it rationally," he finally admitted. "But when I saw him, when I saw how he's alone in his own world, something told me that maybe I could help him find a way out. Or maybe he can show me a different path than the one I've been following." The answer, in its awkward honesty, seemed to satisfy Mrs. Cooper. She nodded slowly. "The process will be lengthy. Psychological evaluations, home visits, preparation of the environment, and most importantly, Johnny will need to gradually adapt to the idea of a new home, a new routine. I'm prepared to wait as long as necessary." 3 months later, After a process accelerated, thanks to Michael's contacts and the boy's irregular situation in the system, Johnny finally arrived at the Highlands Ranch mansion. Michael had transformed one of the guest rooms into a small sensory sanctuary, following all the therapist's guidelines. Walls in soft tones, adjustable lighting, varied textures on surfaces, carefully selected sensory toys. The adaptation, however, proved much more challenging than Michael had imagined in his meticulous plans. Johnny refused food, had crying crises that lasted hours, didn't sleep at night, and was startled by the slightest noises in the house. The sound of the refrigerator turning on, the clinking of cutlery, the simple opening of a door, everything seemed like an aggression to his hypersensitive sensory system. Mrs. Wilson, the housekeeper, tried hard to understand the boy's needs, but her well-intentioned attempts often resulted in more crises. Michael hired nurses specialized in pediatric care, but none could establish a real connection with Johnny. After 2 exhausting weeks, with Michael trying to balance work and care for the boy, the situation reached a critical point. On a particularly difficult night, with Johnny refusing to sleep for the 3rd consecutive day, Michael sat on the floor of the room, exhausted and defeated. "I don't know what to do," he admitted to the night nurse, an experienced lady named Claire. "Maybe I made a mistake. Maybe he would be better at the foundation, with people who understand his needs." Claire, who observed the scene with understanding eyes, sat down beside him. "Mr. Sullivan, children like Johnny need much more than physical structure and medical care. They need emotional consistency, someone who understands their particular language. And I'm clearly not that person," Michael stated, bitter. "You're being too hard on yourself. This takes time, but maybe I can suggest something." Michael raised his eyes, tired from sleepless nights. "Dr. Martha, the boy's pediatrician, mentioned a professional. She works specifically with children on the autism spectrum. She's not just an ordinary caregiver, she's a kind of interpreter of their world." "A therapist? We already have 3. "No, not exactly a therapist in the formal sense. It's something between a caregiver and a special educator. She creates communication bridges where traditional methods fail." Michael frowned, skeptical. He had already hired and dismissed various professionals in the last few weeks. One more name on a list of frustrated attempts. "What's her name?" "Rachel. Rachel Adams." The next morning, Michael asked Melissa to contact this Rachel Adams. To his surprise, there were no social media profiles, professional website, or any significant digital presence. Just references from families and a simple resume sent by Dr. Martha's secretary. Originally from Durango, Colorado. Degree in special education from the University of Colorado. Specialization in alternative communication for children with developmental disorders. 32 years old. Experience with nonverbal autistic children, Down syndrome and other developmental disorders. Melissa read over the phone. "She seems qualified. Schedule an interview for this afternoon, please. She said she can only come tomorrow morning. Apparently she's finishing a job with another family." Michael, accustomed to having his schedule respected by everyone, was surprised by the refusal. "All right, tomorrow 9 o'clock. When the intercom rang at 9 o'clock sharp the next morning, Michael expected to see through the security cameras someone with the typical appearance of a health professional, perhaps a lab coat, hair tied back, document folder. Instead, he saw a woman of medium height, curly hair loose on her shoulders, wearing simple jeans, a blue cotton shirt, and carrying only a colorful fabric bag. If it weren't for the scheduled time, he could have confused her with any casual visitor. Michael observed Rachel Adams cross the front garden with calm steps, as if she were in a park, and not on the property of one of Denver's most influential businessmen. There was something in her posture, an unpretentious confidence that immediately intrigued him. "Good morning," he greeted her formally as he opened the door. "Michael Sullivan." "Rachel Adams," she replied with a restrained smile, shaking his hand with surprising firmness for someone with such small hands. "Thank you for receiving me." As he led her through the imposing entrance hall, with its double ceiling height and marble staircase, Michael noticed that Rachel didn't show the usual amazement of visitors in the face of ostentatious luxury. Her eyes, a deep brown, seemed more interested in the functional details of the house, the natural light, the acoustics, the arrangement of furniture. "Would you like coffee?" "Water?" he offered, indicating the living room. "Water, please," Rachel responded, sitting on the edge of the Italian leather sofa. Her teeth-tight eyes quickly scanned the environment. "This house is very—" She hesitated, searching for the right word. "Sonorous." Michael frowned as he served water in a crystal glass. "Sonorous?" "Yes, the marble, the glass, the polished surfaces. Everything reflects and amplifies sounds. For children with auditory hypersensitivity, like many on the autism spectrum, it can be overwhelming." The observation, made without any tone of criticism, caught Michael off guard. He had never thought of his house in sensory terms. "Let's get to the point," he said, regaining control of the situation. "Dr. Martha mentioned your work with autistic children. Johnny has been with us for almost 3 weeks, and we've been facing considerable challenges. Could you tell me about him? Not the diagnoses or medical reports. Tell me about Johnny as a person." The question caught Michael by surprise again. All previous professionals had requested documents, reports, histories. No one had asked about Johnny as a person. He doesn't speak, doesn't make eye contact, spends most of his time isolated, even when I'm in the same room. He has very specific routines with that piece of paper he always carries. If anyone tries to take it away, it's a crisis for sure. Rachel listened attentively, without taking notes, maintaining eye contact with Michael. "Does he have preferences? Colors, textures, sounds that seem to calm or agitate him?" Michael hesitated. He realized, with a pang of guilt, that he didn't know how to answer these basic questions about the boy he had decided to adopt. "I'm not sure," he finally admitted. "He reacts badly to sudden noises. Sometimes he spends hours observing the patterns of light that come through the curtains." Rachel nodded, understanding. "I'd like to meet him now, if possible." They went up to the second floor, where Mrs. Wilson was trying unsuccessfully to get Johnny to eat a few spoonfuls of oatmeal. The boy kept his face turned to the wall, his body rigid, completely ignoring the housekeeper's attempts. "Mrs. Wilson, this is Rachel Adams. She came to meet Johnny," Michael introduced. The housekeeper stood up, visibly relieved to have help. "Thank God. This boy hasn't eaten properly for 2 days. I've tried everything, oatmeal, fruits, even those crackers he accepted once." Rachel approached slowly. Instead of trying to establish immediate contact with Johnny, she simply sat on the floor, a few meters from him, and began to hum a simple and repetitive melody softly. She didn't look directly at the boy, nor did she try to get his attention. Michael and Mrs. Wilson watched, intrigued. After a few minutes, Rachel took from her bag a small shiny object, something like a miniature kaleidoscope, and placed it on the floor in the direction of the window light. The object projected colorful patterns on the wall near Johnny. The boy, who until then had seemed oblivious to everything, turned his head slightly. His gaze, usually vacant, fixed on the luminous patterns dancing on the wall. For a fleeting moment, Michael saw something he hadn't yet witnessed, a glimmer of genuine interest in the boy's eyes. Rachel continued humming without making any sudden movement to approach. She simply existed in the same space as Johnny, respecting his rhythm, his world. "How long can you stay today?" asked Michael, impressed. "As long as necessary," Rachel replied, without diverting her attention from the dynamic she had established with Johnny. "Our first meeting is important. We're getting to know each other." Michael looked at his watch. He had an important video conference in an hour, but for the first time in years, work seemed secondary. "I'll cancel some appointments," he decided. "I want to follow this." 2 hours later, the progress was subtle but undeniable. Rachel had managed to gradually approach, coming to sit less than a meter from Johnny. The boy still hadn't established direct eye contact, but his body posture was less rigid. At one point, when Rachel placed a small ball with a different texture near him, Johnny extended his hand and touched it briefly, before withdrawing again. "Is that good?" asked Michael, who observed every movement of the interaction. "It's excellent," Rachel replied with a restrained smile. "He's curious. He's testing boundaries in a safe way. Nothing is small when it comes to non-verbal communication." At the end of the morning, Rachel carefully stood up without sudden movements. "I'm leaving now so as not to overwhelm him. Children like Johnny process social interactions differently. They need time to integrate new experiences." "When can you come back?" asked Michael with an urgency that surprised him. "Tomorrow, same time. If it's all right with you, I'd like to start regular work with him." I would come every day for a few hours until we establish a routine. Yes, of course. As for your fees, Rachel raised her hand, interrupting him. We can discuss that later. For now, I have some recommendations to make the environment more suitable for his sensory needs. In the following weeks, the Highlands Ranch mansion underwent subtle but significant transformations. Following Rachel's guidance, Michael replaced the curtains with models that better filtered light, installed carpets in strategic areas to reduce echo, and created sensory decompression spaces in various rooms, small refuges where Johnny could retreat when feeling overwhelmed. Rachel's routine became part of the household's daily life. She arrived at 9, always punctual, with her colorful bag full of carefully selected sensory objects. She spent the morning with Johnny, gradually introducing new stimuli, respecting his limits, celebrating each small advance as a great achievement. Michael, who initially planned to accompany the sessions only occasionally, found himself reorganizing his work schedule to be present whenever possible. Something in the way Rachel interacted with Johnny fascinated him deeply. There was no pressure, no rigid expectations, just a genuine acceptance of the boy's time and space. "How did you learn to do this?" he asked one morning, as they watched Johnny tactilely explore a sensory book that Rachel had brought. "Do what exactly?" "This inner connection, this ability to enter his world without imposing ours." Rachel smiled, thoughtful. "Part is technical training, of course, but much comes from my own experience. I grew up in Durango, Colorado. My younger sister, Cecilia, was born with Down syndrome. In our small town, there were no resources, no specialists. I learned to communicate with her by creating our own language. Your sister, how is she today?" A quick shadow passed over Rachel's face. "Cecilia left us when I was 16. Cardiac complications, common in people with the syndrome. That's when I decided I would dedicate my life to helping children with special needs be understood on their own terms." The revelation created a new context for everything Michael had observed in Rachel. It wasn't just professionalism, it was a personal mission. "I'm sorry about your sister," he said, feeling the inadequacy of the words given the depth of the loss. "Thank you. But Cecilia is still with me in a way. In every child I can help communicate with the world." A month after Rachel's arrival, Johnny's progress was visible. He was already accepting food more easily, sleeping better, and although he still didn't speak, he was beginning to respond to simple commands with gestures. Most significant, however, was when he allowed Rachel to briefly hold the crumpled piece of paper he never abandoned, a demonstration of trust that even moved Mrs. Wilson, who watched the scene with tears in her eyes. "What do you think is with that paper?" Michael asked Rachel, as they had coffee on the veranda after a particularly productive session. "I'm not certain. It could be a transitional object, something that brings him security amid so many changes, or it could have some specific meaning that we may never discover. The important thing is to respect the value it has for him." Michael nodded, thoughtful. He was learning to accept what he couldn't control or completely understand. A novelty for someone accustomed to dominating every aspect of his professional and personal life. "Rachel, I wanted to thank you. I know it's your job, but what you've been doing for Johnny, for us, goes beyond professional." She smiled, a smile that lit up her eyes. "It's a privilege to accompany this journey. Johnny is an extraordinary child. And you?" She hesitated briefly. "You surprised me. It's not common to see someone in your position dedicate themselves so completely to a child with special needs." "What do you mean by someone in my position?" Rachel slightly shrugged her shoulders. "Busy, successful people. The corporate world rarely encourages this kind of emotional connection, this vulnerability." Michael wanted to disagree, to defend himself, but he recognized the truth in her words. Before Johnny, his life was a well-built fortress against any emotional unpredictability. That night, after Rachel left and Johnny finally fell asleep, Michael stayed on the veranda, observing the lights of Denver. The city he had helped shape with his development seemed different now, more alive, more complex, full of stories he had never cared to know. His cell phone vibrated. "The message from Melissa. Mr. Sullivan, the board is concerned about your absence from recent meetings. The Horizons project needs your approval urgently to advance." Michael looked at the message for long moments. 6 weeks ago, He would have cancelled any personal commitment to meet the demands of work. Now he typed a response that would surprise his month-ago self. "We'll deal with it on Monday. I have family priorities at the moment." Family. The word came naturally to his mind without planning. Johnny and he were still learning to be a family. Aunt Rachel, with her quiet wisdom and unconditional acceptance, had become an essential part of this equation still in formation. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give it a like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We continue. Fall arrived in Denver, bringing with it cool mornings and golden afternoons. 3 months had passed since Rachel entered the lives of Michael and Johnny, and the Highlands Ranch mansion was no longer the same cold and impeccable place as before. Sensory toys were strategically scattered throughout the rooms. Colorful drawings, Johnny's first artistic expressions, decorated walls previously occupied only by expensive and impersonal paintings. The most significant transformation, however, was not in the physical environment, but in the people who inhabited it. Johnny, who once existed locked in his silence, now showed clear signs of connection with the world around him. He still didn't speak, but his repertoire of non-verbal communication had expanded considerably. Gestures, facial expressions, and even some vocal sounds formed a unique language that Rachel patiently taught Michael to interpret. That Saturday morning, Michael observed from the veranda as Rachel and Johnny played in the garden. She had brought soap bubbles, a recent discovery that fascinated the boy. The expression of wonder on Johnny's face each time a bubble burst on his small fingers was a reward that no $1 million contract could match. "Mr. Michael," Mrs. Wilson's voice interrupted his contemplation. "Your sister is on the phone. She says it's important." Michael sighed. He had avoided contact with Elizabeth in recent weeks. His older sister, his only living relative besides some distant cousins, had never hidden her discontent with the sudden decision to adopt Johnny. "Tell her I'll call back later, Mrs. Wilson." "She insists, sir. Something about Aunt Eleanor's birthday next weekend." Reluctantly, Michael picked up the phone. Aunt Eleanor, his mother's sister, would be turning 80, and the family was planning a celebration at the historic Sullivan Farm on the outskirts of Denver. "Hello, Liz," he greeted, using the childhood nickname that he knew irritated his always formal sister. "Michael, finally. I've been trying to reach you for days. Melissa says you're always in meetings or unavailable. I've been busy." "Yes, I imagine. Listen, about Aunt Eleanor's birthday. You confirmed your attendance months ago, but I need to know if you plan to bring the boy." The tone with which Elizabeth pronounced the boy didn't go unnoticed, as if Johnny were an object, an eccentricity, a passing whim. "He has a name, Elizabeth, Johnny, and yes, I plan to bring him. He's my son now." A heavy silence on the other end of the line. Michael could almost visualize his sister's displeased expression, the same one she had made since childhood, when things didn't go according to her meticulous planning. "Michael, be reasonable. It will be a formal event, with important people from society. A boy, with his conditions, might cause discomfort. Besides, you barely know him. This adoption happened so quickly, without any consultation with the family. I didn't know I needed to consult anyone about decisions in my personal life," Michael replied, feeling irritation grow. "As for discomfort, the only one that concerns me is Johnny's. If the environment is unsuitable for him, we simply won't go." "It's exactly this kind of attitude that worries me. You've always been rational, methodical. Now suddenly you abandon important meetings, restructure your house, hire this woman that nobody knows." "Okay, Rachel," Michael corrected, feeling an almost physical need to defend the caregiver. "Her name is Rachel Adams, and thanks to her, Johnny has made progress that doctors considered impossible." Another silence, this time calculated. When Elizabeth spoke again, her tone had changed to something softer, more strategic. "Look, I just want what's best for you. I always have. Since our parents passed away, I've tried to take care of you in my own way. I'm happy that you're finding purpose in this situation. I'm just concerned about this woman's motivations." "What motivations, Elizabeth?" "Rachel is a competent, dedicated professional who has worked with special children for years, and now has access to the home and heart of one of Colorado's richest businessmen. Convenient, isn't it?" Michael ended the call without saying goodbye. something he would never have done months ago. His sister's insinuation enraged him in a way he hadn't experienced since their teenage fights. When he returned to the veranda, the scene in the garden had changed. Rachel now held Johnny in her arms, pointing to a hummingbird visiting the garden flowers. The boy watched the bird with absolute attention, his small body completely relaxed in Rachel's arms, a level of physical trust that Michael had never witnessed. The scene instantly dissipated his irritation, replacing it with a wave of gratitude so intense it almost choked him. How could Elizabeth or anyone else question what was happening there? How could they not see the profound transformation that Rachel was working not only in Johnny, but in the very structure of that house, once empty of meaning? That evening, after putting Johnny to bed, a ritual that now included a story told by Michael and a lullaby hummed by Rachel, the two adults sat on the veranda for what had become a habit, a quiet conversation accompanied by tea for her and, occasionally, a glass of wine for him. "Something is bothering you," observed Rachel, always attentive to subtle mood changes. It wasn't a question, but a respectful observation. Michael hesitated. Talking about the conversation with Elizabeth would mean revealing his sister's petty suspicions, something that seemed like a betrayal to Rachel herself. "It's complicated," he finally replied. "Family doesn't always understand our choices." Rachel nodded, understanding. "Big changes often scare those who observe us from the outside, especially when they break long-standing expectations. My sister, she thinks I've abandoned my business, that I'm being irresponsible, that this whole situation is some kind of midlife crisis." Rachel smiled slightly. "And what do you think?" The question hung in the night air, loaded with meaning. Michael observed the city lights below, thoughtful. "I think I've never been more lucid, so present. Before Johnny, before you arrived, I existed on autopilot. Built buildings, closed deals, accumulated things, but I wasn't really living." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was a silence of mutual understanding, of recognition. Rachel extended her hand across the table and, in an unusual gesture for both, briefly touched Michael's fingers. "Thank you for trusting me to be part of this journey," she said, with a simplicity that made the words even more powerful. Michael felt an unfamiliar warmth spread through his chest. It wasn't the common physical attraction he had experienced in previous relationships. It was something deeper, more complex. A connection born of shared vulnerability, common purpose, mutual respect that grew daily. 2 days later, an unexpected situation tested the fragile harmony they had built. Michael was in an important video conference at the office when he received a call from Rachel, something that never happened during work hours. "Michael," her voice sounded tense, contained. "We need to talk. Something happened here at the house." He immediately cancelled the meeting and drove back home in record time, his heart racing with terrible possibilities. Upon arrival, he found Rachel in the living room, her face pale, her hands restless. "What happened? Is Johnny okay?" "He's fine, yes. He's with Mrs. Wilson in his room." "It's about something else." Rachel extended her cell phone, showing the screen of a social media site. A post on an anonymous profile showed a photo taken from a distance. Through the mansion gates, Rachel and Michael on the veranda, talking intimately the night before. The caption read, "Businessman Michael Sullivan and his new employee, business or pleasure. The mysterious woman who gained access to the Sullivan fortune through a convenient adoption." The post already had hundreds of shares and malicious comments, many speculating about the nature of the relationship between them. "This appeared this morning," explained Rachel, her voice trembling. "I've already received messages from other families I work with, questioning my professional ethics. My phone won't stop ringing." Michael felt an icy fury take over his body. "I'll sue whoever is behind this. I'll take down this post in a matter of hours." "It's not that simple," replied Rachel, running her hand through her hair in a rare gesture of nervousness. "This kind of insinuation stains reputations. It harms not only me, but especially Johnny." Michael sat down, stunned. He knew well the destructive power of social media, especially in a city like Denver, where the business elite still operated under conservative codes of conduct. "It was my sister," he concluded, with a certainty that dispensed with proof. "Elizabeth always had contacts in the local press. This has her mark. Michael, we can't be sure. I can. She called me 2 days ago, insinuating exactly what's written there. He abruptly stood up, pacing the room. I'm going to call her right now and... No, Rachel interrupted firmly. Confrontations will only feed more speculation. We need to think of Johnny first. The mention of the boy instantly disarmed Michael. It was true. Any public scandal would directly affect the stability they had fought so hard to build. What do you suggest, then? Rachel hesitated, her gaze lowering to her own hands. Maybe it's better if I step back for a while. I can recommend another professional to continue the work with Johnny. Someone above any suspicion. No, Michael's response was immediate, visceral. That would be allowing them to destroy everything we've built. Johnny needs you. He paused, searching for the right words. I need you too. The look they exchanged at that moment contained more than words could express. There was fear, confusion, but also a shared determination not to allow external forces to define what they were building together. So, what will we do? Asked Rachel, her voice regaining some of its usual firmness. We continue. We ignore the rumors. We live our truth day by day without hiding, but also without feeding speculation. And Michael completed with a resolute gleam in his eyes. Maybe it's time to redefine some relationships in my life. That same afternoon, Michael did something he had postponed for months. He called a meeting of the Administrative Board of Sullivan Developments. For 3 hours, he presented a complete restructuring of the company, delegating more authority to trusted executives, redefining his own role to allow more time with Johnny. Some of you may interpret this as a withdrawal, he concluded, looking directly at the surprised faces around the table. I prefer to see it as a redefinition of priorities. Sullivan Developments has always been more than just profits for me. It's a legacy, and legacies take many forms. Upon returning home that night, he found Rachel and Johnny in the garden enjoying the last rays of sun. The boy was playing with a small watering can, watering the plants under Rachel's gentle guidance. There was a peace in that scene that no malicious headline could diminish. Rachel raised her eyes when she saw him approach. A silent question hung in her gaze. Aunt Eleanor's 80th birthday arrived as a trial by fire. After much reflection, Michael decided to attend with Johnny and Rachel. Not as a challenge to Elizabeth, but because he believed it was important for the boy to be included in family events. Additionally, it would be the first opportunity for the family to truly meet Rachel. Beyond the malicious insinuations, the Sullivan farm, an hour from Denver, maintained the colonial architecture, preserved for generations. White house with blue windows, surrounded by lush gardens and green pastures. It was a living portrait of rural Colorado aristocracy. Michael had spent part of his childhood there, running through the fields with Elizabeth, in the rare moments when his parents could escape their professional obligations. It's a beautiful place, commented Rachel, as the car followed the dirt road leading to the farm's headquarters. In the back seat, Johnny watched the moving landscape with fascination, his face pressed against the window. It has history, replied Michael, holding the steering wheel with unnecessary force. Some good, some not so good. He had meticulously prepared Johnny for the event. Rachel had created visual cards with photos of all the family members who would be present. For days they repeated a familiarization routine, showing images of the farm, explaining what would happen, creating strategies for potentially stressful situations. Remember, said Rachel as they parked, if he becomes overwhelmed, just go to a quiet place. We don't need to stay until the end. And I'll be nearby the whole time. Michael nodded, grateful for the 1000th time for her balanced presence. Johnny already had his security object, the inseparable crumpled piece of paper, firmly held between his fingers. The farm's courtyard was decorated with flowers and colorful ribbons. Tables arranged under centuries-old trees housed about 50 guests, relatives, old family friends, important figures from Colorado society. The arrival of the trio didn't go unnoticed. Conversations momentarily ceased. Curious glances turned to Rachel and Johnny. Elizabeth was the first to approach, impeccably dressed in a navy blue linen ensemble. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Michael, good to see you came. She turned to Rachel with studied politeness. You must be Rachel. Elizabeth Sullivan, Michael's sister. Pleasure to meet you, replied Rachel, with the serenity that characterized her. Johnny was eager to meet his great-aunt. The mention of the relationship, great-aunt, caused a slight tremor in Elizabeth's lips. For her, who had always valued lineage and tradition, the idea of an adopted boy without blood connection, claiming family ties, was still a difficult concept to accept. Aunt Eleanor, however, was a positive surprise. The matriarch, seated in a special wicker chair with a crown of flowers on her white hair, a family tradition for birthday celebrants, opened her arms when she saw Johnny. "So this is the new Sullivan. Come here, my dear." Michael gently guided Johnny, prepared for a reaction of withdrawal. To his surprise, the boy allowed himself to approach the elderly lady without showing anxiety. Perhaps it was the white hair, similar to Mrs. Cooper's from the foundation, or perhaps the genuinely welcoming aura that emanated from the great-aunt. "He doesn't speak." "Aunt," Michael explained gently. "Words are overrated," replied Eleanor with a smile. "Your great-uncle August and I spent 50 years together, and he was a man of very few words. Sometimes we understood each other more in silences than in conversations." The simple wisdom of the lady brought a lump to Michael's throat. She stretched out her wrinkled hand, and in a surprising gesture, Johnny allowed her to briefly touch his hair. "He has eyes like the Sullivans," declared Eleanor, as if ending any debate about belonging. "Deep, observant. Come on, my dear. Would you like a sweet from Grandma Eleanor?" Lunch went better than expected. Johnny remained calm, seated between Michael and Rachel, accepting small portions of food he already knew. Occasionally, some more conservative relatives cast strange looks, especially when Rachel helped the boy with specific techniques she had developed for his feeding. But the imposing presence of Aunt Eleanor, clearly enchanted with the new family member, inhibited open comments. It was during dessert that the situation became complicated. Charles Dawson, husband of a distant cousin and known for his sharp tongue, approached the main table visibly altered by a few shots of artisanal whiskey. "So, Michael, is Sullivan Developments now going to turn into a charity center? I heard you're stepping away from business to care for the boy." The condescending tone with which he pronounced boy left no doubt about his opinion. Michael felt his body stiffen, ready for a harsh response. When he felt Rachel's hand lightly touch his arm, a silent request for calm. "Actually, Charles," he replied with a tranquility that surprised even himself, "I'm diversifying investments. The most important one is in human capital." The polite but firm response momentarily disarmed the provocateur. But Charles, already without social filters due to the drink, didn't give up. "And does this diversification include hiring pretty caregivers?" "I must say, Michael, that you've always had good taste." A heavy silence fell over the table. Rachel paled slightly, but maintained her erect, dignified posture. Michael stood up furious when Aunt Eleanor's voice cut through the air like a whip. "Charles Dawson, if you can't maintain composure and respect in my home, I suggest you withdraw to recover the sobriety and good sense that your mother tried to teach you." Without success, apparently. The authority in the octogenarian's voice was indisputable. Charles mumbled a poorly articulated apology and walked away, being discreetly led away by other embarrassed relatives. Aunt Eleanor then turned to Rachel. "My dear, I apologize for the unworthy behavior. Not all Sullivans have lost their sense of hospitality." Rachel nodded, grateful but visibly uncomfortable with the incident. Michael noticed that Johnny, sensitive to changes in emotional energy in the environment, was beginning to show signs of anxiety. He was subtly rocking, his fingers twirling the crumpled paper with increased speed. "I think we need a quiet moment," whispered Rachel. "He's processing a lot of social information at once." Michael immediately agreed. "Let's take a walk in the gardens." They got up discreetly, Michael thanking his aunt with a look that communicated more than words. They moved to the quieter part of the property, where old jaboticaba trees offered generous shade and the sound of a small stream created a peaceful atmosphere. Johnny visibly relieved when they moved away from the bustle of the party. Rachel led him close to the water, showing how the stones created small waterfalls. The boy's fascination with the aquatic patterns was evident. His eyes followed the flow with absolute attention. "Is he okay?" asked Michael, still shaken by the incident. "He's regulating himself," replied Rachel. "The water helps. Natural elements have a calming effect." They remained there, watching Johnny find his balance again. After a few minutes, Rachel broke the silence. Michael, we need to talk about what happened back there. It was unacceptable. I'll make sure Charles never again— No, Rachel gently interrupted. It's not about Charles. It's about what's happening between us. Michael felt a tightness in his chest. Between us? Rachel looked at Johnny, making sure he was engrossed with the water at a safe but visible distance. People are talking and it can harm Johnny. More importantly, it can compromise my professional effectiveness with him. If there's any perception of personal involvement between us, my authority as a therapist may be questioned. Michael felt a chill run down his spine. Are you saying you should stop working with him? No, Rachel took a deep breath. I'm saying we need to be very clear about professional boundaries. For his sake. But there's nothing between us beyond professionalism, argued Michael, feeling the falsity of his own words. They both knew that, although nothing had concretely happened, something was growing between them, something silent but powerful, like an underground current. It's not about what exists, but about what people perceive, replied Rachel pragmatically, and about how that affects Johnny. The mention of the boy was always the point of return to reality for Michael. She was right. Johnny's well-being needed to come before any other consideration, even if that meant suffocating feelings that they were just beginning to recognize in themselves. What do you suggest, then? Clearer professional distance. Maybe I shouldn't stay for our evening conversations anymore. Maybe— She was interrupted by a sound that neither of them had ever heard before. A small, fragile sound, but unmistakable. Rachel. Both froze, looking at Johnny. The boy was standing by the stream, the crumpled paper secure in one hand, the other extended in Rachel's direction. Rachel, he repeated, clearer this time. Tears instantly sprang to Rachel's eyes. Michael felt as if time had stopped. Johnny had spoken. He had called for Rachel. Not for him, not for Mrs. Wilson, not for any other person. He had chosen to break his silence with her name. I'm here, Johnny, she replied, her voice choked, walking slowly to him and kneeling at his height. I'm right here. The boy took a step forward and, in a gesture he had never made before, rested his forehead on Rachel's shoulder, the closest he had ever come to a hug. Michael observed the scene transfixed. Something profound was happening there, something much bigger than petty rumors or social conventions. There, on the banks of a stream at the ancestral Sullivan farm, a boy whom everyone had disbelieved was reclaiming his own voice. The celebration of Aunt Eleanor's birthday would continue for hours. Speeches would be made, presents would be opened, photographs would be taken. But for Michael, Rachel, and Johnny, the true moment of celebration had already happened. Intimate, profound, transformative. When they finally returned to the party, something had subtly changed between them. A silent resolution, a mutual understanding that the path ahead might be more complex than they imagined, but also more meaningful. Elizabeth approached them as they prepared to depart, hours later. Her face showed an internal struggle, ingrained pride against a growing perception that perhaps she was wrong about many things. Michael, before you go— She hesitated, looking at Johnny, who slept peacefully in Rachel's arms. Exhausted by the intensity of the day, Aunt Eleanor told me something that made me think. She said you look happy, truly happy. Something she hadn't seen since we were children before we lost our parents. Michael nodded, surprised by his sister's sudden vulnerability. I've been— Difficult, continued Elizabeth, the words clearly costly for her pride. Maybe out of concern, maybe out of jealousy. I don't know. But I want you to know that I'm trying to understand. It wasn't a complete apology, nor a total acceptance of the new reality. But coming from Elizabeth, it was a significant beginning. Thank you, Liz, Michael replied simply. That means a lot. As they drove back to Denver, under the starry sky of rural Colorado, Michael reflected on the extraordinary day they had lived. Johnny continued to sleep in the back seat, and Rachel looked pensively out the window. What do you think will happen now? She asked softly, breaking the comfortable silence. With what? With everything. With him speaking. With your family, with us. The word us hung in the air, loaded with unexplored possibilities. Michael kept his eyes on the road, feeling the weight of important decisions ahead. I don't know exactly, he replied honestly, but I know I don't want to go back. I don't want to go back to being who I was before. And I think Johnny is just beginning his journey." Rachel smiled, that calm smile that had become an anchor in his turbulent life. "One day at a time, then?" "One day at a time," agreed Michael, as the car followed the winding road, taking them back home, a concept that, for him, had acquired a completely new meaning in recent months. A year passed since the day Johnny pronounced his first word on the banks of the stream at the Sullivan farm. A year of profound transformations, daily challenges and small victories celebrated as historic milestones. Spring covered Denver with vibrant hues on that September morning. Michael observed the movement in the mansion's garden, where tables decorated with wildflowers and colorful balloons awaited the arrival of guests. It was Johnny's 7th birthday, or at least the date chosen to celebrate it, since his origin remained a mystery. "Do you think many people will come?" asked Mrs. Wilson, adjusting the final details of the dessert table. "I hope so," replied Michael, smiling to see the housekeeper transformed into a kind of doting grandmother for Johnny. Rachel invited some children from the therapy group. Mrs. Cooper will bring some educators from the foundation, and Elizabeth confirmed she'll come with the cousins. The fact that Elizabeth had accepted the invitation was in itself cause for celebration. In recent months, his sister had initiated a cautious approach, visiting occasionally on Sundays, bringing small gifts for Johnny, trying in her contained way to build a relationship with her adoptive nephew. "And the surprise for the boy, is everything ready?" asked Mrs. Wilson, complicit. Michael nodded, feeling a mixture of anxiety and enthusiasm. After months of secret planning, meetings, projects, and renovations, he could finally reveal the big news, not only to Johnny, but to Rachel as well. While Mrs. Wilson returned to the kitchen to supervise the final preparations for the cake, without artificial colorings and with low sugar content, according to the nutritional recommendations for Johnny, Michael walked to his son's room. The door was ajar, and from inside came the voices of Rachel and the boy, engaged in one of their daily communication exercises. "Who's coming to your party today?" Rachel was asking patiently. "Aunt Liz," replied Johnny, in his still hesitant but increasingly clear diction. "Mrs. Cooper, friends?" "That's right. And how do we receive friends?" "Good morning, hi, welcome." Michael discreetly leaned against the doorframe, observing the scene. Johnny was sitting on the edge of the bed, dressed in a light blue shirt that he himself had chosen. Quite an achievement for a child who previously showed no preferences. Rachel, kneeling in front of him, showed cards with images that represented different social situations. The boy's vocabulary, although still limited, had expanded considerably over the past year. More impressive than the words, however, was his growing capacity for interaction. He still had moments of isolation, and occasionally became overwhelmed in very stimulating environments. But the difference between the boy huddled in the corner of the foundation and this one who now rehearsed greetings for his party was simply extraordinary. "Look who's here," said Rachel upon noticing Michael's presence. "I think someone came to see how the birthday boy is doing." Johnny raised his eyes and, upon seeing Michael, opened one of his rare smiles. "Dad." The word still caused an overwhelming emotion in Michael every time he heard it. Dad, a title he had never imagined bearing, now the most important definition of his identity. "Hey, champion. Ready for your party?" Johnny nodded, getting up and walking to Michael, another notable evolution in his motor coordination. "Present?" he asked with the direct frankness that characterized his communication. Michael and Rachel exchanged a complicit look, laughing. Some typical characteristics of childhood were apparently universal, regardless of any neurological particularities. "Later," promised Michael, affectionately messing up his son's hair. "First the guests, then the presents. That's the agreement, remember?" The boy nodded, returning to Rachel to continue the preparation. Michael walked away, feeling that same wave of gratitude that frequently came over him in recent months. Gratitude for Rachel, for her infinite patience and quiet wisdom. Gratitude for Johnny, for his courage in gradually emerging from his isolated world. Gratitude for the life they had built together, imperfect and challenging but deeply meaningful. The guests began to arrive shortly after noon. First came the children from the therapeutic group that Johnny attended twice a week, little warriors, each with their particularities and challenges. The parents, initially hesitant in the luxurious environment of the mansion, soon relaxed upon realizing the welcoming atmosphere created especially for diverse sensory needs. Quiet areas for decompression, music at controlled volume, soft lighting. Mrs. Cooper arrived accompanied by some educators from the foundation and 2 older children who had known Johnny during his time at the institution. She hugged Michael for a long time with tears in her eyes. "When you showed up that day at the foundation, I never imagined we would get here," confessed the lady, watching Johnny calmly interact with one of the children under Rachel's attentive gaze. "You gave him much more than a roof, Michael. You gave him a chance to exist on his own terms." Michael felt his throat tighten. "I received much more than I gave, Mrs. Cooper. He and Rachel, they changed everything." The mention of Rachel made the lady smile with a gentle wisdom. "And you two? Any news I should know about?" Michael felt his face warm slightly. After that day at the farm, he and Rachel had established clearer professional boundaries, out of respect for Johnny and the therapeutic process. The evening conversations on the veranda became less frequent. Rachel began to leave right after putting the boy to bed, and Michael concentrated his energies on restructuring the company and caring for his son. But the feelings hadn't diminished, only matured, transforming into something deeper than the initial attraction, something founded on mutual respect, genuine admiration, daily partnership in the face of the challenges of raising a child with special needs. "It's complicated," he finally replied, knowing the answer was insufficient. Mrs. Cooper gave an affectionate pat on his arm. "Life usually is, my son, but we rarely find people who make us want to face those complications. When we do, it's a waste to let it pass." The arrival of Elizabeth, accompanied by the cousins and their children, interrupted the conversation. Michael's sister seemed nervous, carrying a large package wrapped in colorful paper. Her relationship with Johnny was still cautious, marked by a mutual shyness, but Michael genuinely appreciated the effort she made to overcome ingrained prejudices. "I thought he might like it," explained Elizabeth, handing the present to Michael. "It's one of those weighted blankets that I read help children with tactile sensitivity. I researched a lot." The gesture, and especially the fact that Elizabeth had researched the specific needs of her nephew, touched Michael deeply. "He'll love it, Liz, thank you." The party proceeded with surprising tranquility, considering the diversity of children present. Rachel had prepared the guests in advance, sending a small guide on how to interact with Johnny. No sudden noises, respecting his personal space, giving him time to process questions before expecting answers. The cake moment was adapted to the sensory particularities of the birthday boy, without the traditional shrill singing, replaced by a happy birthday at a moderate volume, accompanied by soft percussion instruments that Rachel had introduced in Johnny's music sessions. When the last guest said goodbye, already in the middle of the afternoon, Michael finally announced, "Johnny, it's time for your special present. But for that, we need to take a little trip." Rachel looked at Michael, intrigued. It wasn't in the plans to leave the house after the party. "Trip?" repeated Johnny, always cautious with changes in programming. "Yes, but it's nearby. And you'll like it very much, I promise." The boy looked at Rachel, seeking confirmation that this unexpected change was okay. "We can go," she assured, though she also seemed curious. "If you get tired or uncomfortable, we'll come back right away." Michael led them to the car, helping Johnny settle in the back seat with his new weighted blanket. Elizabeth's gift, which the boy had instantly loved. Rachel sat beside him, as she always did during travel. They drove for only 15 minutes until they reached a quiet neighborhood near a large municipal park. Michael parked in front of an old mansion, completely renovated, with a lush garden surrounding the property. A discreet sign at the entrance announced, "New Horizons Institute, Center for Development and Inclusion." "Michael, what is this?" asked Rachel, confused. He smiled, feeling his heart race. "Our new project. Or rather, your new project, if you'll accept." They got out of the car and Michael opened the gate, inviting them in. The garden had been specially designed as a sensory space, with different plant textures, colors organized in specific zones, and small stone paths that created circuits for tactile exploration. "For the past 8 months, I've been working on this project," explained Michael, observing Rachel's surprised expression. The idea arose after realizing how many children like Johnny don't have access to qualified professionals, adequate spaces, dignified treatment. He led them through the interior of the renovated mansion. There were rooms specially designed for occupational therapy, music therapy, sensory integration, a library with books on child development, alternative communication, inclusive education, an experimental kitchen for adapted food workshops, everything thought out in the minutest details to meet the diverse needs of neurodivergent children. The idea is to offer multidisciplinary treatment for children of all social classes, continued Michael, as they walked through the luminous and welcoming spaces. A scholarship system will ensure that families without resources can have access to the same services as those who can pay. Johnny explored the environment with evident curiosity, touching different textures on the walls, observing the patterns of light that came through the colored windows. He seemed comfortable, as if somehow understanding that this space had been conceived with people like him in mind. "Michael, this is extraordinary," Rachel finally said, visibly moved. "But what did you mean by my project?" He took a deep breath, preparing for the moment he had mentally rehearsed for weeks. "I want you to be the director, Rachel. I want you to lead the team, define the methodologies, make this place a reference in humanized care. No one understands better than you what these children need." She remained silent for long seconds, absorbing the proposal. Her eyes scanned the space as if evaluating possibilities, imagining futures. "And Johnny? I can't simply stop working with him. We're at a crucial moment in his development." "He'll be the first official student," replied Michael with a smile. "I thought of everything. You can continue your work with him here, in an even more suitable environment, while forming a team that shares your vision. And thus, gradually, you'll be able to help dozens, perhaps hundreds of other children." Rachel walked to one of the windows, observing the sensory garden where Johnny now carefully explored a water fountain with colorful stones at the bottom. "Why, Michael? Why do all this?" It was the same question Mrs. Cooper had asked him the day he decided to adopt Johnny. And, as on that occasion, there wasn't a purely rational answer. "Because meeting you and Johnny showed me that there's a different way of being in the world. That success isn't measured by closed contracts or built developments. That there are children like him everywhere, just needing a chance, someone who believes in their unique potential." He approached her, gathering courage for the second part of his proposal, the part that had kept him awake in recent nights, rehearsing words and scenarios. "And also because I want to build something meaningful with you, Rachel. Something that goes beyond the therapist-patient relationship, beyond what we already share because of Johnny." Rachel turned to face him, her intense brown eyes studying him with the same quiet attention she dedicated to everything. "Are you offering me a professional or personal proposal?" she asked directly in her characteristic style. "Both, if you want," replied Michael honestly. "I know it's complex. I know there are ethical issues, professional boundaries, but I also know that what I feel for you is real, deep, and mature. It's not gratitude confused with attraction. It's not idealization. It's admiration for the extraordinary human being that you are." Johnny chose that moment to return from the garden, his little hands wet from exploring the fountain, a rare smile illuminating his face. He ran, another notable motor progress to Rachel, pulling her by the hand to show his discovery. "Colored water," he exclaimed, with the genuine joy that only recently he had begun to express openly. Rachel allowed herself to be guided by the boy, casting Michael a look that clearly said, "We'll continue this conversation later." The three spent the following hours exploring every corner of the institute. Michael explained the project details, partnerships with universities for research, the professional training program, expansion plans to other cities. Rachel asked incisive questions, made practical suggestions, her brain clearly processing possibilities and improvements. When they finally returned to the mansion, night was falling. Johnny, exhausted by the day's emotions, fell asleep almost immediately after his bath, wrapped in his new weighted blanket, under the loving gaze of Rachel and Michael. They silently left the room, leaving the night light on, another of the important routines for the boy. In the corridor, Michael hesitated. "Coffee on the veranda," he offered, recalling the evening conversations that had become rarer in the past year. Rachel nodded, and for the first time in a long time, They sat in their usual places on the veranda, under Denver's starry sky. The silence between them was comfortable, loaded with possibilities. "The Institute is extraordinary, Michael," she finally said. "It's a transformative project." "So you accept the professional proposal?" Rachel smiled, her eyes reflecting the city lights below. "Yes, with some conditions and adjustments we can discuss, but yes, I accept leading the Institute." Michael felt a wave of relief and joy. "And what about the other proposal? The personal one?" She studied him for long moments before responding. "That one is more complicated. I know. There are ethical issues. There's the confusion of roles. There's Johnny, who needs stability and clarity." "I know all that," agreed Michael. "And I'll respect your decision, whatever it may be." Rachel let out a sigh, leaning slightly forward. "You know what Johnny told me a few weeks ago, in one of our communication sessions?" Michael shook his head, curious. "We were working with cards of family situations. I showed an image of a traditional family, father, mother, children. I asked, 'Who is your family, Johnny?' 'Thaise.' And do you know what he answered? 'Says what? Dad, Rachel, family, just like that.' In his mind, we're already a unit." Michael felt emotion form a lump in his throat. "And is that good or bad?" "Fert, it's real," replied Rachel with her usual frankness. "It's his perception of the world we've built together. And maybe it's time to honor that perception." "What are you saying?" She smiled, that calm smile that had become his north, his anchor. "I'm saying yes, Michael, to both proposals, but we'll need to go slow, create smooth transitions, especially for Johnny. Each step will have to be carefully thought out." Michael felt a joy so intense he could barely breathe. He extended his hand across the table, and Rachel entwined her fingers with his. A simple gesture, but loaded with meaning, with promise. "One day at a time?" he asked, recalling the conversation from a year ago on the return from the farm. "One day at a time," confirmed Rachel, "building safe bridges between different worlds, as we've always done." Under Denver's starry sky, while Johnny slept wrapped in his new blanket, Michael and Rachel began to write a new chapter of that unlikely story that had begun with an unexpected encounter at a foundation. A story about looking beyond appearances, about finding family in the most unlikely places, about the courage to build bridges instead of walls. In the quiet room of the mansion, the small crumpled piece of paper that Johnny never abandoned rested on the nightstand. No one had ever discovered its original meaning, perhaps a last link to an unknown past. But that no longer mattered so much. What mattered was the future opening up ahead, uncertain, challenging, but full of possibilities. And as Michael and Rachel talked in low voices on the veranda, planning the next steps of their shared journey, Denver's lights twinkled below, as if the city itself celebrated the new bridges that were emerging, invisible but powerful, between worlds that previously seemed incommunicable.